Right, so GB News has had a mare of a week, frankly, hasn't it? Completely self-inflicted to the point that even Tories that appear on the channel's shows that are trying to help salvage their precious platform are in fact doing the complete opposite and seem to be ushering its end in all the sooner. The channel seems to be in its death throes, but it's not all bad for right-wing politics, of course. They'll still have the BBC. As things stand, though, 3 of the channel's hosts have been taken off air in the last week, so perhaps they'll need more Tories to take over as hosts and further bring into question whether the channel is the news outlet its name suggests, or is that only for when OFCOM aren't sniffing around? But with so many Tories on the payroll, that's a valid question, because at what point does the channel stop being news, if it ever starts, and becomes nothing more than a propaganda machine, if it was ever anything any different, because it very much appears to be the latter. And when that's the case, OFCOM not shutting them down raises yet more questions, and the demise of the channel actually cannot come soon enough because people are not being well served by our media, which was already bad, but with the likes of GB News about is even worse now. The case for supporting alternative media in the UK has never been stronger. Right, so GB News, they've had a rotten week, and frankly they've deserved it. They've had it coming for a while, ever since they decided to be the one media outlet to not suspend Dan Wootton in light of the sexual abuse allegations that have been circulating about him, which I've covered in other videos. This past week, that all changed though, when he decided to have a giggle alongside actor turned hard-right half-wit Lawrence Fox on his show at the expense of Politics Joe journalist Ava Santina Evans, who in a BBC interview stated that she felt a minister for men fed into a culture war. The Tories do love those, don't they? And it's hard to imagine this was dreamt up by the Tories for any other reason, though Evans later clarified she felt a minister for mental health, particularly in young males, had some merit, which I would absolutely agree with. Now, it's very easy for we on the left to point and jeer at the sort of stereotype we have in our heads for the average GB News viewer, but 7,300 complaints about Fox's misogynistic rant off the back of Evans' BBC interview that set Wootton off in fits of mirth were received by Ofcom off the back of that. And really that gives me some hope for these people, because even they recognised that Fox's attack actually had nothing to do with what Ava Santina Evans had actually said. His attack was personal. He made it about her. He made it about her appearance. He made it about objectifying her and belittling her as a woman to Wootton's obvious glee. Where Wootton later apologised for his conduct because it clicked in his head to realise eventually how it looked, particularly, no doubt, after some feedback, and has said he should have intervened. No shit, Dan. Lawrence Fox remained completely unrepentant, though, putting out on Twitter that he wouldn't want to shag a hyper-offended fourth-wave feminist, and that he would never apologise to the mob. He did apparently apologise to Evans, but that depends on what you read. Take a step back, everyone. It looks like his God complex has been shattered, and you really don't want to step on those pieces. Fox and Wootton are both now suspended from GB News, and that might yet become permanent. Wootton has also been officially sacked by the Mail Group, having been suspended already over those catfishing allegations I mentioned before, losing him £250,000 a year. Ouch! The third suspension this week from GB News, though, actually had nothing to do with this particular incident, but was too stupid to not keep his mouth shut over the same issue, and that was Calvin Robinson, who gobbed off on Twitter that he was not appearing, as he so often did, on Dan Wootton's show, in solidarity with Wootton being suspended, part of which read, "To have the conversations the shills on other channels cannot or will not have, we must do all we can to avoid GB News becoming just another MSM outlet, which it will if we let it. Our bosses are scared, afraid of Ofcom, afraid of the woke mob, and afraid they're going to run out of money unless they manage to sort this advertising problem out. We need to give them courage, not enable them to capitulate. If they pander to the woke mob, we are finished. Someone else might get the prime slot for a bit, but it will not be a promotion if you jump in Dan's grave. You'll just be making space alongside his corpse for your own. Standing up for Dan is standing up for the very idea of GB News. If he falls, we all fall. We are about to see if people really care about the project or they just want a better slot with a bigger team and better pay." He was then probably suspended too. Now, the likes of Calvin Robinson can bleat about GB News becoming part of the MSM, but actually what they've done is proven that they can't operate without becoming more and more extreme in order to stand out. And in doing so, the channel, or the bosses, have had to step in. The channel that rallies against wokery and champions free speech ends up parodying itself by doing just that, because they had no concept of responsibility to go with any of it. Where it comes to Wotton, given the seriousness of the allegations made against him earlier this year, the chance to rid themselves of him now feels like GB News regretted not sending him packing earlier. Rumours are he might well leave the UK after all of this now and go back to New Zealand, and if so, he won't be missed. The owner of GB News, Sir Paul Marshall, apparently wants to detoxify the GB News brand, but frankly, whilst it still disputes over whether or not it is actually a news channel or no, that's a little bit of a stretch. Also, if becoming mainstream is so anathema to them, why is Marshall currently trying to buy the Tory graph? Can that rag get any worse? Well, it might. Quite possibly if he succeeds. Just this week, Ofcom did happen to make a ruling in relation to GB News, though, and that was on its insistence that politicians acting as hosts did not break impartiality rules because the politicians were not presenting news programmes. Unfortunately, when the channel is literally called GB News, all programming is considered to be news to some extent or another by the people watching it. There's been a blurring of the lines here, and when you've got the likes of the Tory party deputy chairman, Lee Anderson, 30p Lee, interviewing Suella Braverman and letting her spout whatever she chooses completely unchallenged, that's propaganda. That's not an interview. That's not holding power to account. Just to reinforce that point, Anderson's Twitter account literally sports the GB News logo rather than that of the party he's been elected to represent. So what does that say of his priorities? Politicians are always in the news. All their actions, no matter how minor, are news to somebody. And to have one politician from the governing party interviewing a government minister in what's basically a puff piece for someone who, to my mind, is a wannabe fascist, well, how is that not news? You then have the likes of Esther McVeigh, though to the disabled and out of work, she's better known as Fester McVile, after her stint at the DWP, and her equally odious husband, the Seamus Shipley, Philip Davies, presenting a show together. Then you have Jacob Rees-Mogg, who thinks himself far cleverer than he actually is, and whose own mouth ran into trouble on the first day of Tory party conference on this very issue, when speaking to Channel 4 News' Cathy Newman. Newman put to Mogg that the broadcasting code right now says no politician should be used as an interviewer in a news programme. 2 of your shows are being investigated by Ofcom. Do you think the code should be changed in the interest of freedom of speech? Mogg's answer to this was that I think the code works perfectly well. I think what I am doing is within the code. Really, GB News is the conservative equivalent of Channel 4 News. You're on the left, we're on the right. Okay, so you're being investigated over impartiality claims, and you basically confirm in your own words that GB News is a conservative outlet and therefore not impartial. Better make sure all the Tory electioneering that channel will be doing in the run-up to the general election goes down as campaign expenses, eh, Jacob? GB News is a channel whose reputation was already low, and it is just sinking lower. Tory conference has also seen Priti Patel, of all people, speak about GB News, calling them defenders of free speech, when they've literally suspended 3 of their top presenters over that free speech coming without any semblance of responsibility. Not that she ever showed much responsibility when she was Home Secretary, of course. It is an irresponsible channel. Carol Vorderman this week took a swipe at Lee Anderson for his pathetic love-in with Braverman, to which Anderson answered that the sooner we ban single plastics the better, taking a personal swipe again, which just seems to be a GB News presenter's trait. It isn't just GB News that remains so dishonest, though. As I have said at the start, they still have the BBC, which, given it is reliant on government money via the TV licence to run, is always beholden to the government of the day. Their little collaboration with the campaign against anti-Semitism to attack the likes of Ken Loach and Roger Water is a classic example right now. And those attacks really should be casting fresh light on all of the attacks on Jeremy Corbyn that came before, that came from the same vested interests of right-wing politics, or the establishment, and anyone, frankly, daring to criticise the state of Israel. What do you think, though? Is GB News just the most extreme end of the general travel of our media, or are they just more blatant about it? Have they had their chips now, or will they struggle on? Will they become more mainstream in temperament, but no less right-wing with it, in a bid to survive? And can they really, after they've been damaged so badly, with advertisers still pulling their revenue? Do let me know what you think of this situation in the comments below and be part of the conversation. I'm always interesting to read what you're thinking. Thanks for watching, though. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content out daily. Meanwhile, here's a video recommendation where much of the news coming out surrounding Dan Wootton had come from exclusives by Byline Times. Independent media again. He called the lawyers in apparently over that. Expensive ones too. It's all gone very quiet since, so I wonder what's happened. I'll hopefully see you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.